I stood in the hallway, gripping the plain white envelope in my hands, my fingers trembling. The afternoon light from the window cast long shadows across the floor, but my world had suddenly shrunk to the few lines scribbled on the piece of paper inside. My heart pounded as I unfolded it, the inked words burning themselves into my brain. Your wife is sleeping with Justin, your barber. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It felt like someone had punched me in the gut, leaving me winded and gasping for air. Justin. I had known him for years. He cut my hair, trimmed my beard, made small talk about football and weekend plans. He was our family barber, a trusted face in our lives. And now I had to digest the fact that he wasn't just cutting my hair. He was seeing my wife, Claire, behind my back. I slumped against the wall, the weight of the letter dragging me down. How had I not seen this coming? Every sign was there, hiding in plain sight. Claire's late-night hair appointments always ran longer than usual. The constant praise she heaped on Justin, his skills, his attention to detail, how charming he was. I'd brushed it off as friendly banter, thinking nothing of it. We both saw him regularly. Why wouldn't she be comfortable around him? But now, with the proof in front of me, it all made sense. The unexplained absences, the hurried text messages, the late-night showers. It was all part of her secret life, a life I wasn't invited into. Rage boiled in my chest, but I swallowed it down, forcing myself to stay calm. I needed to think. Screaming, confronting Claire right now, it would be too easy. Too satisfying, sure, but too simple. She didn't deserve an emotional outburst. No, I needed to hit her and Justin where it hurt. I needed to make them pay in a way they wouldn't see coming. I sat down at the kitchen table, the letter still clutched in my hand. If what it said was true, and Claire was truly having an affair with Justin, this wasn't just about infidelity. This was about humiliation. She had dragged me into their sordid little game, making a fool of me in front of the entire town. How many people knew? How many had seen them together and whispered behind my back? But I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. If Claire and Justin thought they were smart, they had no idea what I had in mind. I wasn't going to confront her with accusations. I wasn't going to cry, beg, or plead for answers. Instead, I was going to play this out like a slow-burning fire. One that would consume them both. There was one thing I knew about Justin, one little weakness that I could exploit. He wasn't just a charming barber with quick hands and a sharp wit. He had a darker side. I'd noticed the way he eyed the cash register in his salon, how he pocketed tips with a little too much ease, like he had no intention of declaring them on his taxes. There were rumors and whispers about small amounts of money disappearing from the till when the owner wasn't looking. It was time to put those rumors to good use. I could feel the gears turning in my head as I leaned back in my chair, the rage slowly subsiding into a cold, calculated plan. Claire had betrayed me, and I would make sure she felt the sting of that betrayal in ways she couldn't imagine. I wouldn't just take away her lover. I'd take away her pride, her dignity, and everything she thought she had control over. I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the quiet street below. This wasn't going to be quick, and it wasn't going to be clean. But when it was over, Claire would have nothing left. And Justin? He'd wish he'd never touched another man's wife. The next few days felt like I was living in someone else's life. I played my role perfectly, just a regular husband, blissfully unaware. Claire came home late twice that week, claiming work was keeping her tied up, and I didn't flinch. I acted as though everything was normal, as though I hadn't just had my world turned upside down by that damn letter. But inside, I was seething. Every time she smiled at me, every time she kissed me goodbye, I imagined her sneaking off to Justin. I wanted to explode, to throw everything in her face. But no, that would be too easy for her. She'd expect a fight, some dramatic confrontation where she could paint herself as the victim, claim she made a mistake, and beg for forgiveness. I wasn't giving her that chance. Instead, I focused on Justin. He had no idea what was coming. My plan was already in motion, and all I needed was the right moment to make my move. It wasn't hard to get close to Mark, the owner of the salon where Justin worked. Mark was the kind of guy who loved to chat, and when I casually mentioned getting a trim, he was quick to invite me in. As soon as I walked into the salon, the familiar scent of hair products and cologne hit me, but this time, it felt different, charged with tension, like I was walking onto a stage where everyone knew their lines except me. Mark greeted me with a wide grin. And after a few pleasantries, I steered the conversation exactly where I wanted it to go. You ever have problems with the staff? I asked, leaning back in the chair, pretending to be more interested in my reflection than his answer. I mean, with money, theft, anything like that? Mark's expression darkened. Funny you mention that, he said, his voice dropping. I've noticed a couple of things out of place lately. A few hundred here, a few hundred there. Not enough to cause a scene. But enough to make me suspicious, you know? I nodded, feigning concern. That's tough, man. You trust your employees, and then stuff like that happens. It could be anyone. Mark sighed. Yeah, well, I've got my eye on someone. I knew who he meant. I knew exactly who he meant, but I let him say it. Justin, he muttered, almost too quietly for me to hear. Great with the customers, but something's been off lately. Too many long breaks, always the last one to leave. And now, with the missing cash. His voice trailed off. Perfect. The seed was planted. Well, if you need someone to back you up, just say the word, I offered, pretending to be the concerned friend. I'm here every couple of weeks. I can keep an eye out if you need another set of eyes. Mark nodded, appreciative. I might take you up on that, David. I left the salon that day knowing I had him exactly where I wanted. Mark was already suspicious, and it wouldn't take much to push him over the edge. And Justin, well, he was just cocky enough to keep making mistakes. I just needed to wait. A few days later, Claire told me she was going to the salon again. This time, I didn't bother asking when she'd be back. Instead, I made sure I had an excuse to swing by the salon myself. A last-minute urgent trim. I wanted to see her face when I walked in unannounced. As I pulled up to the salon, my stomach churned. Part of me didn't want to see them together. Part of me wanted to tear the place apart, rip Justin out of there, and make sure he never touched her again. But I needed to stay calm. I needed this to work. I stepped inside and was greeted by the usual buzz of hairdryers and chatter. Mark was behind the counter, his eyes lighting up when he saw me. I glanced around, searching for Claire and Justin. Then I spotted them. They were in the far corner of the salon, Claire sitting in his chair, smiling up at him as he ran his fingers through her hair. My stomach twisted into knots, but I forced myself to walk toward them, pretending like everything was fine. David. Claire's voice was strained, her smile faltering. She hadn't expected me here. Not today. Hey, I said casually, forcing a grin. Just thought I'd swing by for a quick cut. You know, can't let Justin have all the fun. Justin turned, and for a split second, I saw something in his eyes, panic. He knew, but he quickly masked it with a smile. Of course, man, I've got time. Just finishing up with Claire here. I nodded, playing along, but inside, I was already planning my next move. As Justin finished with Claire and motioned for me to sit, I glanced over at the counter. The register was half open, a few bills hanging loosely, and Mark was distracted, chatting with a customer. It was almost too easy. Justin turned away for just a moment, and I made my move. With a quick, subtle flick of my wrist, I nudged the drawer open just a little more, making it look like Justin had been careless. Then I waited. As soon as Mark noticed, the whole mood of the salon changed. He walked over, frowning at the register, glancing suspiciously at Justin. It was only a matter of time now. I smiled to myself. This was just the beginning. It didn't take long for Mark to act. A couple of days later, I got the call I'd been waiting for. David, it's Mark. His voice came through the phone, tense and uncertain. Can you come by the salon? I think I'm gonna need your help with something. I could hear the unease in his tone, and I knew exactly what he was talking about. My plan was finally coming together. Sure thing, Mark, I said, trying to sound as casual as possible. Be there in 20 minutes. I hung up, staring at the phone for a moment. This was it. Justin had no idea that he was walking right into my trap, and Claire. She was about to lose the man she'd thrown her marriage away for. I could barely contain my anticipation. When I arrived at the salon, Mark was pacing near the front desk, his face set in a deep frown. The atmosphere in the salon felt tense, like something was about to snap. Justin was in the back, tending to a customer, completely oblivious to the storm brewing around him. Mark pulled me aside, lowering his voice. I caught him, David. More money missing, and this time, it's enough to prove it. I checked the cameras. He's been dipping into the register when he thinks no one's looking. I nodded, suppressing a smile. It was exactly what I wanted to hear. Mark ran a hand through his hair, frustration clear on his face. I don't know what to do. I've known him for years. But I can't let this slide. I have to report it. You're doing the right thing, Mark, I said, giving him a firm pat on the shoulder. You can't let him steal from you. I'll back you up if you need someone to talk to the cops. He nodded, his jaw tightening with resolve. Yeah, you're right. I didn't think it would come to this. Mark pulled out his phone, his fingers hovering over the keypad for a second before he made the call. I watched as he stepped away, his voice low but steady as he spoke to the police. My pulse quickened. Soon, Justin would be exposed and humiliated in front of everyone. Claire wouldn't be able to deny it anymore. Her precious lover was nothing more than a thief. Minutes later, 2 uniformed officers walked through the door, their presence sending a ripple of tension through the salon. I stayed seated, watching the scene unfold like a spectator at a theater. Is Justin here? One of the officers asked. Mark motioned toward the back. He's with a client. You can wait for him to finish. No need, the officer said. We'll need to speak with him now. As Justin appeared from the back, still laughing with his client, the officers approached him. His smile faltered as they stepped closer, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. Is there a problem? He asked, glancing between Mark and the officers. We've received a report of theft, one of the officers said, pulling out a notepad. We need to ask you a few questions about some missing money from the salon. Justin's face went pale, his eyes darting toward Mark in disbelief. What? I haven't stolen anything. This is ridiculous. Mark's voice was cold as ice. We have it on camera, Justin. You've been skimming from the register for weeks. You think no one noticed, but I've got the footage to prove it. The entire salon fell silent. Claire, who had just walked in, stood frozen near the entrance, her eyes widening in shock as she took in the scene. Her gaze flicked between Justin and the police, horror slowly dawning on her face. She didn't know whether to stay or run, but I caught her eye and gave her the coldest, most deliberate look I could muster. It was all crumbling down around her. Justin, now visibly panicking, raised his hands defensively. Mark, come on, man, we've known each other for years. I'd never. This has to be some kind of mistake. The officers weren't buying it. One of them stepped forward, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. You're under arrest for theft. You have the right to remain silent. No, wait. Justin tried to back away, but the officer caught his arm and snapped the cuffs around his wrists. This is insane. Claire, help me. Tell them this isn't true. Claire stood there, rooted to the spot, her mouth slightly open but no words coming out. She looked like she was watching her entire world fall apart in front of her, because she was. She had no idea what to do, no way to fix this. And I was enjoying every second of it. Claire? Justin's voice was desperate now. But she didn't move. She couldn't. The officers led Justin out of the salon in front of everyone. The clients watched in shock, some whispering to each other, others pulling out their phones to record. Justin's career, his reputation, and everything he had built were being dismantled in a matter of minutes. As soon as they were gone, Mark slumped against the counter, shaking his head. I can't believe it came to this. I placed a hand on his shoulder. You did what you had to do, Mark. He betrayed your trust. At least now you can move on. Claire, still standing near the entrance, finally snapped out of her trance and rushed over to me, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. David, this can't be happening, she whispered, grabbing my arm. Justin he couldn't have. I looked at her, the anger that had been simmering inside me for weeks finally boiling over. You have no idea what he's capable of, Claire. Just like I had no idea what you were capable of. Her face crumpled as my words sank in. There was no way out for her now. She had lost Justin, and she had lost me. As I walked out of the salon, leaving her standing there in shock, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. My plan had worked. The days that followed Justin's arrest were a blur of satisfaction and quiet tension. News of his theft spread fast. In a town like ours, scandals didn't stay hidden for long. Everyone knew Justin as the smooth-talking barber with a loyal clientele. But now, all anyone could talk about was how he was a common thief. I could see the whispers everywhere, at the grocery store, at the gym, even when I took the kids to school. People were piecing it together. Claire wasn't just married to the guy who had Justin arrested, she was the one who had been caught in the middle of it all. I made sure not to say a word about her affair, but in a town this small, Rumors always grew legs and sprinted. Soon, people would know about her and Justin. It was only a matter of time. At home, Claire was unraveling. She moved around the house like a ghost, her once confident and vibrant demeanor reduced to something fragile and uncertain. Every time she tried to bring up Justin, I shut her down with a simple look or a curt response. I wasn't ready to talk, not yet. I wanted her to sit with it, to feel the weight of everything she'd done. It was Claire who finally broke the silence one night, nearly a week after Justin's arrest. We were sitting in the kitchen, eating dinner in near silence. The clink of silverware against plates was the only sound in the room, and it grated on me. "David," she said softly, her voice breaking the stillness. I know I've messed up. I didn't mean for things to go this far." I didn't look at her. I kept cutting my steak, my jaw tight. She took a deep breath and kept going, clearly desperate to explain. "Justin, he was a mistake. I thought," her voice cracked, and she paused. "I thought I was missing something in our marriage. And I was stupid enough to believe that he could give it to me. But I see now how wrong I was." I dropped my fork, the sound echoing in the silence. Finally, I looked at her, and for the first time since this whole mess started, I let her see the anger in my eyes. "A mistake?" I repeated, my voice low but sharp. "You think this was just a mistake, Claire? You threw away our marriage for what? Some excitement? A little attention from Justin?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. I was done feeling sorry for her. "I've been nothing but loyal to you, Claire. I gave you everything, and you betrayed me. You humiliated me." I stood up, pushing my chair back. "You weren't just unfaithful, you were reckless. You didn't care about what it would do to me, to our family." She started sobbing, but I couldn't feel sympathy. Not yet. This was her mess to clean up, and there was no fixing it. "I don't want to hear any more excuses," I said coldly. "You've lost your lover. And soon, you'll lose everything else. You're going to feel the pain you've caused me." I walked out of the kitchen, leaving her to cry at the table. I knew she wanted my forgiveness, but I wasn't ready to give her that. Maybe I never would be. As the days turned into weeks, the cracks in Claire's world grew wider. Our friends began to distance themselves. Every invitation to a dinner party or weekend barbecue suddenly dried up. No one wanted to be around her, and she could feel it. The whispers had spread beyond just Justin's theft. People knew, or at least they suspected, the real reason behind his sudden fall from grace. I hadn't said a word, but Claire's guilt was written all over her face. She was a walking billboard for the affair, and people weren't stupid. They knew how to read between the lines. One afternoon, Claire came home looking more defeated than I'd ever seen her. Her shoulders slumped as she dropped her purse on the counter, not even bothering to meet my eyes. "Shelley canceled our lunch," she muttered. Her voice small. Shelley was her closest friend, the one person who had always been in her corner. If even she was turning her back on Claire, then things were worse than I thought. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "People are starting to realize who you really are," I said, my tone cold but matter of fact. "They don't want to associate with someone who lies and cheats." Claire's eyes filled with tears, but I didn't soften. I couldn't. She needed to understand the gravity of what she'd done. "David, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I know I've lost everyone, but I can't lose you. I'll do anything to make this right. Please, just tell me what to do." I stared at her for a long moment, the silence between us thick with tension. Part of me wanted to make her suffer more, to drag this out until she was completely broken. But another part of me, buried deep, felt a flicker of something close to pity. Could I really hold this over her forever? Could I continue living with her, knowing I'd never be able to trust her again? "I don't know if you can fix this," I finally said, my voice softer now, but still firm. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to look at you the same way. You've shattered everything we built." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'll do whatever it takes, David. I'll go to therapy, I'll give you space, anything. Just don't give up on us." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words. Therapy? Space? Could any of that really heal the wound she had torn open? I wasn't sure, but for the first time, I felt the tiniest crack in my armor. "We'll see," I said after a long pause. "But you need to understand that this isn't something that just goes away. You've lost a lot, and you'll lose more before this is over." Claire nodded, wiping her tears, desperate to cling to any shred of hope. "I understand. I do. I'll prove it to you." I wasn't convinced, but for now, it was enough to watch her squirm under the weight of her own choices. She had wanted excitement. She had wanted Justin. And now, she was paying the price, with no clear way out. This was only the beginning of her fall. And whether I stayed or left, I knew one thing for certain: Claire's life would never be the same again. Weeks passed, and Claire's desperation became more and more obvious. She was scrambling, trying to piece her life back together, but the damage was already done. Every day she tried to initiate conversations, make plans, and act as if she could somehow rebuild what was left of our marriage. But there was no going back. The gossip had taken root in every corner of our small town. Friends who used to stop by now avoided our house altogether, pretending they didn't see us at the grocery store or at school drop-offs. Claire couldn't even go to her yoga class without receiving judgmental stares. People might not have come right out and said it, but everyone knew. The whispers weren't just about Justin's arrest anymore, they were about the affair. One afternoon, Claire came home, slamming the door behind her. I was sitting on the couch, reading, but I didn't look up. I didn't need to ask what had happened, I could already guess. Someone had said something, or maybe Shelley had cut her off again. It didn't matter. This was her reality now. "David," Claire said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and frustration. "I can't keep living like this. People are treating me like I'm some kind of criminal. Everywhere I go, there are these looks, these whispers. It's unbearable." I finally glanced up from my book, meeting her gaze with indifference. "And what do you expect me to do about it, Claire? You brought this on yourself." Her face crumpled, but this time, there were no tears, just raw frustration. "I know I did, but I'm trying. I'm doing everything I can to fix things with us, to make things better. But no matter what I do, it's like I'm still being punished." "You are," I said coldly, setting my book down. "You don't just get to walk away from something like this without facing consequences. You betrayed me. You humiliated yourself. Did you really think people would just forget?" She didn't respond right away. Instead, she paced the room, her hands twisting together as she tried to find the right words. I need a chance to move on from this. I need a way out. I can't keep living under this cloud of judgment." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. For weeks, I had watched her unravel, and part of me had reveled in it. She deserved every bit of what she was going through. But now, I was beginning to see that it wasn't just about punishment anymore. She was crumbling in front of me, and if she broke completely, I wasn't sure what would be left. "What do you want from me, Claire?" I asked, my voice softening just a fraction. She stopped pacing and looked at me, her eyes filled with desperation. "I want to move away. Just for a while. Somewhere we can start over, where people don't know what happened. Maybe then we can rebuild our marriage, away from all this." I stared at her, the weight of her words settling over me. Move away? Part of me balked at the idea. Why should I uproot my life because of her mistakes? But another part of me, the part that was tired of the constant tension, the endless coldness between us, considered it. Maybe leaving would give me the space I needed to decide if this marriage was worth saving. Maybe it would give me clarity. "You really think moving will fix everything?" I asked, skepticism lacing my voice. "No," she admitted, her voice small. "But I think it might give us a chance. A real chance, without everyone watching and judging us. Without the weight of all this gossip." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the street, at the life we had built here, the life she had shattered. Could I really leave it all behind? "I'll think about it," I finally said, not turning to face her. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no, either. The decision to move lingered over the next few weeks like an unanswered question, creating even more distance between us. Claire threw herself into trying to prove she could change, arranging therapy appointments, going out of her way to be helpful around the house, and even asking how I felt, something that had been missing for months before everything blew up. But my trust was shattered. No amount of therapy or chores could rebuild the foundation she'd destroyed. I saw it in every interaction, in every look. When she smiled, I wondered if she was remembering Justin. When she touched my arm, I felt the weight of her betrayal pressing down. It wasn't just my hurt anymore, it was my identity, and I carried it with me everywhere. One evening, the tipping point came. We were sitting in the living room, the air between us thick with the usual tension. The kids had gone to bed, and we were pretending to watch TV, though neither of us paid much attention to what was on the screen. Claire broke the silence first. "David," she said, her voice careful, as if she was afraid to set me off. "I've been thinking. If moving away is too much right now, maybe we could just go on a trip. Somewhere quiet. It could give us some space to clear our heads, too. No, I said flatly, cutting her off. I didn't even look away from the TV. I'm not going anywhere. She blinked, clearly taken aback by the bluntness of my response. But I thought. You thought wrong, I said, finally turning to face her. A trip isn't going to fix this, Claire. Nothing is. You can't just run away from what you did. Her face tightened, frustration boiling to the surface. David, I know I messed up, okay? But how long are you going to keep punishing me? I'm trying. I'm really trying to make things right, but you won't even meet me halfway. I stood up, pacing the room. Her words, her pleading tone, they were all too familiar now. I'd heard them so many times in the past few weeks, and each time, they grated on me more. You think this is about punishment? About making you suffer? She stood up, too. Her frustration now matching mine. Yes, David, I think that's exactly what this is about. You want me to pay, over and over again, for what I did. And I get it, okay? I deserve it. But at some point, you have to decide if you want this marriage or not. Because right now, it feels like you're just stringing me along, waiting for me to break. Her words hung in the air, heavy and cutting. She wasn't entirely wrong. Part of me did want her to break, to feel the same hopelessness I had felt when I found out about her and Justin. But part of me, deep down, knew that wasn't sustainable. This couldn't go on forever. I stopped pacing, turning to face her. I don't know if I want this marriage anymore, Claire, I said, the words coming out harder than I intended. Every time I look at you, all I see is what you did. And I don't know if I can live with that. Her face crumpled, but she didn't cry this time. She just stood there, silent, absorbing the blow. For once, she didn't try to plead or argue. She just nodded, her eyes dull with resignation. So what now? She asked quietly. Are we done? I didn't have an answer. I didn't know if we were done, or if this was just another phase of the long, drawn-out ending of our marriage. All I knew was that something had to change, and soon, because we couldn't keep living like this. I don't know, I said finally, my voice low. I need time. I need space. Claire nodded again as if she had expected that answer all along. I'll stay with Shelley for a while, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Give you the space you need. As she turned to leave, a part of me wanted to stop her, to say something, anything, that would give us hope. But I didn't. I let her walk out the door, leaving me alone in the silence of a house that now felt unbearably empty. The cracks in our marriage had finally split wide open, and there was no telling if they could ever be mended. When Claire left that night, the house felt larger than ever. The silence that had once been suffocating between us now expanded into every corner, filling the empty rooms. It was strange how quickly I had gone from resenting her presence to missing the sound of another human being in the house. I didn't miss her, exactly, not yet. But the void she left behind was unmistakable. At first, I tried to embrace the solitude. I told myself that this was what I had wanted: space, time to think, time to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. But the quiet soon became unbearable. I couldn't escape the memories that haunted every room. The kitchen, where we used to laugh over burnt dinners. The living room, where the kids used to pile onto the couch between us. The bedroom, where the silence had been the loudest, long before Justin. The kids stayed with Claire at Shelley's for the time being. I had insisted on that, needing time to clear my head before they came back into the mix. But the truth was, I missed them. Their absence made everything feel wrong, like the house itself was grieving the loss of its family. I started going for long drives after work, just to avoid coming back to the house. It felt like every wall in that place was a reminder of what had been lost. The neighborhood was small enough that I couldn't avoid hearing the latest whispers about Claire and Justin, or the way people's eyes lingered on me just a little too long at the grocery store. One afternoon, as I was driving aimlessly through town, I pulled over at a park that we used to take the kids to. I hadn't been there in months. I sat in the car, staring out at the swings swaying gently in the breeze. Memories flooding back, Claire pushing the kids, laughing as they begged to go higher. Back then, everything had seemed so simple. It was strange how you could live in the same place for years and never really see it. How everything could shift in a matter of months, turning familiar places into painful reminders of what you had lost. I didn't stay long. The memories were too much. But as I drove back home that evening, something shifted in me. I couldn't stay stuck in this limbo forever. drowning in the past. Claire had betrayed me, but it was up to me to decide what came next. That night, I sat down in the quiet of the empty house and started making a list. Not of things to fix between Claire and me, that was too far off. Instead, I made a list of things I needed to do for myself. Get back to the gym. Spend time with the kids. Talk to a therapist. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I couldn't control what Claire had done, but I could control what happened next for me. A week passed before Claire called, her voice tentative on the other end of the line. I wanted to check in, she said, her tone soft. About the kids. And you. I leaned back in my chair, glancing at the to-do list I had stuck to the refrigerator. They're fine with you for now, I said. I'm still figuring things out. There was a pause, long and heavy. And, how are you? It was a strange question, considering. How was I? A month ago, she wouldn't have cared. Now, I wasn't sure if it was guilt, obligation, or something more. But I didn't feel like sharing. I'm managing, I replied, keeping my voice even. Doing what I need to. Another long silence. I've been seeing a therapist, Claire finally said, as if she had been waiting for the right moment to bring it up. It's helping me sort things out. I know it's not a quick fix, but it's something. I didn't know how to respond to that. Part of me wanted to tell her it didn't matter, that no amount of therapy could undo what she'd done. But another part of me, the part that was slowly resurfacing, knew that if we were ever going to move forward, it would start with her taking responsibility. I'm glad, I said, after a beat. You needed that. I did, she agreed, her voice softening. I'm working on myself, David. I want you to know that. I sighed, rubbing my temples. Claire, I don't know where we go from here. I'm trying to figure things out, but I need time. I can't just snap my fingers and move on like nothing happened. I don't expect that, she said quickly. I know I hurt you, more than I can ever fix. But I'm not giving up on us. I just wanted you to know that. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I let them sink in. Claire had broken our trust and shattered everything I had believed in. But I also knew that at some point, I would have to make a choice. Either I would forgive her and try to rebuild, or I would walk away completely. I'm not ready yet, I said finally, my voice quiet but firm. But I'll let you know when I am. The conversation ended shortly after that, leaving me to sit in the quiet of the house once more. But something was different now. Claire was working on herself, and in her own way, so was I. The bitterness hadn't disappeared, but the sharp edge of it was beginning to dull. The next morning, I got up early and went for a run, the first time in months. The fresh air felt good, clearing my head, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I wasn't sure if things with Claire could ever be fixed, but for now, I was focusing on myself. It was the first step. The rest would come, or it wouldn't. Either way, I was moving forward. And that was all I could do for now. As the days blurred into weeks, life began to find some strange semblance of normalcy, though nothing was truly the same. I stuck to my routine, work, the gym, spending time with the kids on weekends when Claire brought them back. Slowly, things started to feel less raw. But the underlying tension between Claire and me was still there, even though we rarely spoke about anything beyond logistics for the kids. One evening, after a long day at work, Claire showed up at the house to drop off the kids. She lingered in the doorway a little longer than usual, as if she had something on her mind. I couldn't help but notice she looked different, not in a physical sense, but there was a weight lifted from her. Maybe the therapy was actually doing something. I was wondering if we could talk for a minute. She said, her voice careful but not pleading like it had been before. I hesitated, but nodded, stepping aside to let her in. The kids had already bolted upstairs, so it was just the two of us standing awkwardly in the living room. Claire looked around the room as if she hadn't been inside it in months, even though it had only been a few weeks since she left. You've changed things, she said, noting the small differences I'd made. New throw pillows, rearranged furniture, small touches that made the space feel more like mine. Yeah, I replied, unsure where this conversation was heading. Needed a change. She nodded, then took a deep breath. I wanted to tell you something important. I sat down, motioning for her to do the same, though she remained standing, her arms folded in front of her. I could see she was nervous but determined. I've been doing a lot of thinking, she began, her voice steady but quiet. About everything, about us, the affair, what led to it. And I know it's taken me a long time to really understand. But I want to take full responsibility for what happened. I raised an eyebrow, unsure where this was going. You've already admitted to it, Claire. We're past that. No, I don't think we are, she said, shaking her head slightly. What I mean is, I've been making excuses, blaming our distance, my own unhappiness, the kids, the pressure of life. But none of those things justify what I did. I need to own that completely. Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, they didn't feel like empty promises. She wasn't pleading for forgiveness or trying to fix things instantly. She was just being honest. I've been seeing Dr. Levin twice a week, Claire continued, mentioning the therapist she had started seeing. She's helped me realize that I wasn't just unhappy in our marriage, I was unhappy with myself. And instead of dealing with that, I ran away into something destructive. I leaned back in my chair, absorbing what she was saying. It was the first time Claire had really owned up to the affair without deflecting the blame elsewhere. She had always been quick to shift the focus, on our problems, on the distance between us. But this felt different, and I'm not asking for you to forgive me, she added quickly. I know that's a long way off if it's even possible. I just wanted to let you know that I'm trying to change, not just for you, but for myself. I'm trying to be better, for the kids, for us, even if we never get back together. I didn't know how to respond at first. There had been so many conversations where she had tried to apologize, to smooth things over, but this one felt different. There was no desperation in her voice, no need for immediate validation. Just a quiet acknowledgement of the damage she had caused. I appreciate that, I said slowly. It's good to hear that you're working on yourself. She smiled faintly, relieved but not overly hopeful. I know I can't undo what I did, and I'm not asking for things to go back to how they were. But I also don't want us to hate each other forever. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel anger bubbling up inside me when she spoke about the past. The bitterness that had consumed me was starting to lift, just a little, and in its place was something else, acceptance, maybe. Not of what had happened, but of the fact that we couldn't change the past. We'll never be the same, I said quietly, almost to myself. But maybe we can figure out how to move forward. Claire nodded, her eyes softening. I hope so. For the kids, if nothing else. The conversation didn't end with any grand declarations. No promises of a future together. But something had shifted between us. For the first time, I saw a path, not a clear one, not even necessarily a path back to each other, but a path toward healing. I'll let you get back to your evening, Claire said after a while, standing up and heading toward the door. Thank you for listening, David. I nodded, watching her leave. As the door clicked shut behind her, I felt the familiar silence of the house settle in, but it didn't feel as oppressive as before. I still didn't know where we were headed, but for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like the end of everything. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to rebuild, not the marriage we once had, but something new. Whether that meant we would eventually be together or simply learn how to coexist, I didn't know. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid to find out. A few weeks passed after Claire's unexpected conversation, and although things didn't magically get better, something had changed. There was less tension when she came by with the kids, and our interactions, though brief, were more civil. Neither of us brought up the future, but there was an unspoken understanding that we were both trying, in our own ways, to make sense of what came next. I started seeing my own therapist. It wasn't something I ever thought I'd do, but I needed an outlet, a space where I could talk about everything without feeling judged or pressured to make a decision. Dr. Harris, my therapist, was direct but compassionate, pushing me to confront the pain and anger I'd been holding onto. For so long, I'd let it define me. But now, slowly, I was learning how to separate myself from it. One afternoon after a session, I decided to take the kids to the park. They'd been asking for days, and it felt like the right time to get out of the house. Claire had mentioned that Shelley was taking them to see a movie later that evening, so I had a few hours with them before they went back to their temporary routine. As we walked through the park, I watched them run ahead, their laughter filling the air. It felt good to be outside, feeling the sun on my face, and realizing that, despite everything, life was still moving forward. The kids were adapting in their own way, but they didn't ask too many questions about why things were different. I knew those questions would come eventually, and I would have to find the right words to explain them to them. Dad, push me higher. Oliver called out from the swing set, grinning ear to ear. I smiled, jogging over and giving him a good push. Hold on tight, buddy. As I stood there, watching the kids play, I felt a sense of calm that had eluded me for months. Maybe it was the simplicity of the moment, or maybe it was because, for once, I wasn't thinking about Claire or Justin or the endless spiral of what-ifs. I was just there, in the moment, with my kids. Later, as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, we packed up and started heading back to the car. Claire was waiting at the house, leaning against her car when we pulled into the driveway. The kids ran over to her, excitedly recounting their day at the park. She smiled at them, brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, and then looked up at me. "How was it?" she asked, her voice light. "Good," I said, nodding. "We needed it." There was a brief pause. Not uncomfortable, just reflective. For the first time, it didn't feel strange seeing her here, in front of the house that used to be ours. Things weren't normal, far from it, but they were manageable. After the kids said their goodbyes, Claire and I stood by the cars for a moment, watching them buckle into her backseat. She glanced over at me, her expression thoughtful. "I wanted to ask if you'd be open to the four of us having dinner together soon. I think the kids would like it. And maybe it would be good for us to start doing some things as a family again." The suggestion caught me off guard. We hadn't done anything together as a family since everything had blown up, and the idea of sitting down to a meal, pretending like everything was fine, felt overwhelming. But at the same time, it wasn't about us, it was about the kids. They deserved some sense of normalcy, even if it was temporary. I took a breath, considering. "Yeah," I said finally. "I think that could be good." Claire's face softened, clearly relieved. "Maybe next weekend, then? I'll cook. Or we could go out if that's easier." "Let's start with something at home," I suggested. "Keep it simple." She nodded, and for a moment, we stood there, not saying anything. It was strange how, despite everything that had happened, we were both learning how to navigate this new version of our relationship, whatever that was going to be. As she drove away with the kids, I stood in the driveway, watching the taillights fade into the distance. The old bitterness, the resentment that had once flared up every time I saw her, wasn't as sharp anymore. I wasn't naive, I knew we still had a long way to go, and I wasn't sure where this path would lead. Maybe we'd never fully reconcile, and this was just part of the process of learning how to co-parent and coexist without tearing each other apart. But as I turned and headed back into the house, I realized something: I wasn't trapped in the past anymore. The pain was still there, but it didn't consume me the way it once had. Maybe that was progress, or maybe it was just the beginning of something different, something neither of us could predict. And for now, that was enough. The following Saturday evening, I stood in the kitchen, staring at the clock. Claire was bringing the kids over in half an hour for our first attempt at a family dinner. It was her idea, but I agreed to host. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew it was a step we needed to take, for the kids. And maybe even for ourselves. I had decided to keep things simple. Claire was bringing a salad, and I made spaghetti, something the kids loved and that didn't require much effort. The house smelled like garlic and tomato sauce, a welcome distraction from the quiet tension that had been building inside me all afternoon. At exactly 6:30, the doorbell rang. My stomach twisted as I walked over to answer it, a mix of nerves and anticipation settling in. When I opened the door, there stood Claire, holding a large salad bowl in one hand and smiling awkwardly. Behind her, the kids were already bouncing with excitement. "Hey," she said, her voice light but uncertain. "Hey," I replied, stepping aside to let them in. The kids rushed past us, already running toward the dining room, their laughter filling the house. Claire and I exchanged a glance, both aware of the unspoken tension between us but determined not to let it ruin the evening. This wasn't about us, it was about making things feel normal for the kids. Even if it was temporary. As Claire set the salad on the table, I brought out the spaghetti and meatballs, trying to focus on the task at hand rather than the awkwardness between us. We sat down, and for a moment, everything felt almost normal. The kids started chatting about their week, talking over each other in their excitement to share stories about school, their friends, and their new favorite video game. Claire smiled at them, her face softening in a way that made me remember the good times. For a brief moment, I caught myself wondering if we could ever get back to that place, to the version of us that wasn't broken. But I quickly pushed the thought aside. I wasn't ready to go down that road. As dinner continued, the conversation flowed easily, thanks mostly to the kids. They kept things light, and we followed their lead. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't uncomfortable either. There were moments of silence between Claire and me, but they weren't as heavy as they had been in the past. Maybe it was because we were both making an effort, or maybe we had just grown used to this new reality. After dinner, as I cleared the plates and Claire helped the kids with dessert, I realized that we had made it through the evening without any major hiccups. It felt surprisingly okay. Not great, not like old times, but manageable. And that was more than I had expected. As the kids finished their ice cream and ran off to play in the living room, Claire and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen. Cleaning up. The silence between us was different now, less strained, more tentative, like we were both testing the waters. "I think tonight went well," Claire said, breaking the silence as she handed me a dish to dry. I nodded, glancing over at her. "Yeah, it did." The kids seemed happy. She smiled, a small, genuine smile. "That's what matters." We continued cleaning in silence for a few more minutes before she spoke again, her voice softer this time. "I wasn't sure how tonight would go. But I'm glad we did this." "Me too," I admitted. "It's good for them to see us like this." Claire hesitated, then leaned against the counter, looking at me with a seriousness I hadn't expected. "I know things are still complicated between us, but I'm hoping we can keep doing this. For the kids, but also for us. I don't mean getting back together," she added quickly as if she didn't want to give the wrong impression. "But just learning how to be in each other's lives without all the anger." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I had held on to that anger, that sense of betrayal, because it was easier than facing the possibility of moving on. But as I stood there, looking at her, I realized that maybe, just maybe, it was time to let go of some of that. "I think that's possible," I said slowly. "We don't have to figure it all out right away, but we can try." Claire's shoulders relaxed, and she nodded. "That's all I'm asking." We finished cleaning up in silence. But it wasn't the uncomfortable kind of silence we had become so used to. It was a silence filled with possibility, with the tentative hope that maybe we could find a way to move forward, even if it wasn't in the way we had once imagined. As Claire got ready to leave with the kids later that night, I walked them to the door. The kids hugged me tightly, their energy still buzzing from the excitement of the evening. Claire smiled at me as she opened the door, and for the first time in a long while. It didn't feel forced. "Thanks for tonight," she said quietly. "Yeah, of course. Let's do it again sometime." She nodded, and with that, they were gone, the house once again falling into a familiar quiet. But this time, the silence didn't feel so heavy. It didn't feel like the end. I stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door, thinking about what Claire had said. Maybe we would never get back what we had before, but we were learning how to exist in this new reality. We were learning how to be a family in a different way. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was just surviving. I was starting to live again. And that was a step I hadn't been sure I could take. The following few weeks after that dinner, Claire and I continued to navigate this new reality, making small efforts to create a sense of normalcy for the kids. We had a few more dinners, went to the park as a family, and even attended one of Oliver's soccer games together. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when the old wounds resurfaced, threatening to tear open, but I tried my best to focus on the future rather than the past. But as life slowly began to feel more stable, I started to notice something strange. Claire had become more distant again. Not toward the kids, she was still attentive and present for them, but toward me. Conversations that had been growing easier now felt awkward again, stilted, like she was holding something back. I could sense it in the way she avoided my eyes during family dinners and the way she left quickly after dropping off the kids without lingering for small talk. At first, I thought it was just part of the process. Maybe things were getting too comfortable, too quickly, and she needed space. I tried not to push, giving her room to breathe, hoping it would pass. But the more time went on, the more my gut told me something was off. One evening, after Claire dropped off the kids and hurried away like usual, I stood by the window, watching her car pull out of the driveway. A nagging suspicion gnawed at me, one I hadn't felt since I'd first discovered her affair. I didn't want to believe that something was happening again, that after everything, Claire was hiding something from me. But as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling. So one afternoon, after picking up the kids from school, I made a decision that I wasn't proud of but felt necessary. I drove by Claire's new place, something I hadn't done since she moved out. It was a small house on the outskirts of town, nothing fancy but cozy enough for her and the kids. I parked down the street, feeling ridiculous for even being there, but I couldn't ignore the nagging voice in the back of my head. I waited, watching the house, half hoping to see something that would confirm my suspicions, half hoping to see nothing at all. And then, after what felt like an eternity, I saw a familiar figure step out of her front door. It wasn't Claire, it was Justin. My blood went cold. He was there, in her house, casually walking out like he belonged. I watched, frozen in disbelief, as he got into his car and drove off. I didn't follow him. I couldn't. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. I had assumed she had cut ties with him after everything blew up, after her promises and apologies. But there he was, walking out of her house like nothing had changed. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I spent the next few days in a daze, trying to figure out what to do. The anger I had worked so hard to let go of was back, burning in my chest. But more than the anger, I felt betrayed all over again. She had been seeing him, behind my back, behind the kids' backs, while we were trying to rebuild some semblance of a family. I wanted answers, but I wasn't sure I could handle hearing them. It didn't take long for my anger to boil over. I couldn't keep it inside anymore, couldn't pretend like I didn't know what was happening. I had to confront her, even if I wasn't ready for the fallout. I called Claire the next evening, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "We need to talk," I said, not giving her any room to refuse. She hesitated. "Is everything okay? Did something happen with the kids?" "No, it's about us. About you." There was a long pause on the other end, and I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, trying to figure out what I knew. "Can we meet at your place?" I asked, keeping my tone controlled. "I'll be there in an hour." Another long pause, and then she agreed, though her voice was tense. "All right, I'll see you soon." I hung up, already on edge. The drive over was tense, my mind racing with everything I wanted to say, everything I wanted to accuse her of. I wasn't sure if I could keep my cool, but I knew I needed to hear the truth from her mouth. When I arrived at her place, I knocked on the door, my heart pounding in my chest. She opened it, looking more nervous than I'd seen her in a long time. I stepped inside without saying a word, and she shut the door behind me, standing there, waiting for me to speak. "What's going on, David?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I turned to face her, my jaw tight. "I know about Justin," I said, the words coming out harder than I intended. "I saw him leaving your house the other day." Claire's face drained of color, her eyes widening. She opened her mouth to say something, then closed it again, clearly caught off guard. There was no use denying it, she knew she had been caught. I didn't wait for her to speak. "After everything we've been through, Claire. After everything we've done to try and fix this for the kids. For us, you're still seeing him?" Her eyes filled with guilt, and she shook her head quickly. "It's not what you think." "Don't," I snapped, cutting her off. "Don't tell me it's not what I think. I saw him, Claire. I saw him walk out of your house like nothing had changed. And I can't believe that after everything we've gone through, you would do this again." She stood there, her hands trembling slightly, struggling to find the right words. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she said finally, her voice breaking. "I thought I was done with him. I wanted to be done with him. But he kept showing up, and I was weak. I didn't mean for it to happen again." I stared at her, the betrayal cutting deeper than I had expected. It wasn't just about the affair anymore, it was about the lies, the broken promises, the way she had strung me along, making me believe that we were working towards something better. "Do you even care about fixing this family?" I asked, my voice low and raw. "Or was this all just an act to make yourself feel better?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I couldn't find it in myself to feel sorry for her. "I do care," she whispered. "I've been trying, but I'm a mess. I don't know what I'm doing, and I hate myself for it." Her words rang hollow in my ears. I didn't care about her excuses anymore. "Then maybe it's time you figure it out," I said coldly. "Because I can't keep doing this, Claire. I can't keep pretending like everything's going to be okay when you're still lying to me." She took a step forward, reaching out as if to touch me, but I stepped back, shaking my head. "Don't." Her hand fell back to her side, and she stood there, defeated, knowing that this time, there was no way to undo what had been done. "I'll be here for the kids," I said, my voice firm. "But you and we're done." And with that, I turned and walked out the door, leaving her standing in the wreckage of what we had tried to rebuild. The moment I walked out of Claire's house, it felt like the weight I'd been carrying for months had finally lifted. The anger, the betrayal, it was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it no longer controlled me. I had made my decision. There would be no more second chances, no more false hope. Claire and I were over for good, and this time, it was final. The next few days were a blur of emotions. I didn't tell the kids about the confrontation with Claire. They didn't need to know the details. All they cared about was that we were still their parents and that we loved them. That's what mattered now, being there for them. Even if Claire and I couldn't be together. I spent more time with them, focusing on creating new routines. We went on more outings and played games at home, and I tried to be present in every moment. It was hard not to dwell on the past, not to replay every hurtful memory of Claire and Justin. But the more I focused on the kids, the easier it became to let go of the bitterness. A week after the confrontation, I met with my lawyer to finalize the divorce papers. There wasn't much left to fight over. We had already agreed on a custody arrangement, and the financial details had been sorted out months ago. All that was left was to put it on paper, to make it official. As I sat in the lawyer's office, signing the documents that would legally end our marriage, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. I had loved Claire once, with everything I had. We had built a life together, started a family, and shared years of memories. But that chapter was over now. I knew it had been over for a long time. Even before I had discovered the affair. Walking out of the lawyer's office, I felt free. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. The future was uncertain, sure, but it was mine again. I didn't have to worry about what Claire was doing or who she was with. I could finally focus on myself, on healing, and on being the best father I could be. The weeks that followed were surprisingly peaceful. Claire and I communicated strictly about the kids. There were no more tense conversations, no more pretenses about working things out. She seemed to understand that our relationship was beyond repair, and she didn't try to push me for anything more. It was an unspoken agreement. We were co-parents now, nothing more. I threw myself into my work, finding solace in the routine. It helped keep my mind off things, and I started making plans for the future. Small plans at first, renovating the house, taking the kids on a trip. But gradually, I began to think about bigger things. What kind of life did I want now that I was on my own? What kind of man did I want to be? One evening, after putting the kids to bed, I sat on the porch with a glass of whiskey, watching the sunset. It had been months since I allowed myself to just sit and think without the constant weight of the past hanging over me. For so long, I had been consumed by Claire's betrayal, by my own anger and hurt. But now, sitting there in the quiet, I realized something. I was okay. It didn't happen all at once, but slowly, I had started to heal. The wound was still there, but it wasn't as raw, as consuming as it once had been. I could see a future now, one that didn't involve Claire, but still involved happiness, peace, and maybe even love again one day. As I sipped my drink, I thought about the kids. They were resilient, adjusting better than I had expected. They didn't ask as many questions as I had feared. To them, their world was still mostly intact. They had both parents who loved them. Even if they weren't together. That was enough for now. I glanced up at the stars, feeling the cool night air against my skin. There was still a long road ahead, but I wasn't walking it in the dark anymore. The path was clearer now, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I was in control of where it led. I didn't know what the future would bring, but I knew one thing for certain: I was moving forward. Away from the pain, away from the past. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to embrace whatever came next.